Welcome to the introductory video for the upcoming admissions interview training. I'm preparing this in advance of our session to offer a little bit of the background material and some of the foundations related to best practices in conducting interviews. This will allow us during our time together for the admissions training to probe a little bit deeper and also to really focus our time on some activities that are going to build your interviewing skills. I'd like to give a quick overview of what our goals are for our time together. There's going to be three things that we cover in our interview training session. The first is we're going to have a little bit of discussion about the difference between the job interview, which most of you participated in during your internship job search, and an admissions interview. What we'd like to do is spend some time comparing and contrasting and using that as a benchmark. The second goal is really providing you with some of the techniques to conduct a successful interview. What are some of the best practices? There are also some particular things that are relevant as a booth ambassador, and we want to make sure that you have those tools at your disposal. And then the third thing is to give you the skills necessary to execute the interviews and be able to evaluate the candidates while simultaneously being a booth ambassador. As we begin, I just want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Pam Schilling. I'm a Booth alumnus of the class of 2000, and I'm really excited to be able to work with the Booth admissions team and all of you to provide this interview training. There's a couple of things that I think are important about my background that shape some of the perspectives I bring and the insights that I have about the interview process. First, like you, I've gone through the interview process as a candidate. I did so looking for my post-graduation position, as well as a number of different roles that I then pursued in my 15-year career after getting my MBA. The second part is, as a result of that, I was sitting on the other side of the table. I was an active participant in the recruiting and hiring process, both in consulting and in my corporate roles. And as a consultant, there's tremendous training that comes with being an interviewer and making sure that the process facilitates the best evaluation of candidates. And that's a wonderful foundation. The third part of my background is actually participating in various processes with the Booth community. I've done this in two ways. One, I was actually a member of the career services team as a coach in Hyde Park for a few years. And of course, we know that the career services team has a great deal of insight about the interviewing process. Along with that, for several years, I participated as an alumni admissions interviewer. And so I was sitting in the same seats that you are looking at potential candidates to bring into the Booth community. And from those experiences, I've been able to gain a lot of insights about what it really takes to conduct an effective interview. And so the conversation that we're going to be having in our training is shaped by that experience. So the focus of this introductory video is to really cover a couple of key elements related to interview foundations. Now, for some of you, this may be a refresher. It also is going to reinforce some of the points that the admissions team will be making regarding the qualifications and characteristics of Booth applicants that we'll be evaluating in the interview. So this is really just a short introduction to give us all a common understanding and some context as we move forward into the actual training session. The big picture related to interview foundations includes four main topics that we're going to cover. I'm going to touch on a couple of these during this introductory video, and then we'll expand on this in our actual interview training session. The first couple of things that I'm going to be reviewing are the Booth characteristics that we are looking for in applicants, as well as an overall view of the different types of interview questions, the way in which you can pose a question, and what the purpose and use for that type of question is. Now, as we get together in our face-to-face session, we're going to go a little bit further and deeper in the interview foundations. We're actually going to be mapping some of the questions to the different types of characteristics and going a bit further to prepare a roadmap for the actual interviews that you're going to be conducting. The first topic that I want to touch on is an overview and a little bit of explanation about the booth characteristics that we're going to be evaluating in the interview process. It's a best practice for any organization when evaluating a potential candidate to have a prioritization of the key characteristics, skills, abilities that they're looking for in an applicant. For our interviews, there are 4 main characteristics that we're seeking to understand: interpersonal skills, resilience, the focus and professional goals, and obviously the interest that that applicant has in coming to Chicago Booth. So during this interview, there's going to be a number of different things that through your questions and interactions you're trying to assess. As it relates to the interpersonal skills, there's a number of different aspects to that. Communication skills, the confidence and presence of that person, the warmth and genuineness that they express, and how they present themselves, their communication style. Resilience is another very important topic and can often be challenging to try to assess in an interview. So we'll be spending some time on that during our face-to-face session together. But ultimately, we want to understand how much ability has this applicant had to try to recover from challenges that they faced? Have they been able to find ways to connect to others who are different? Do they have a level of self-awareness? And can that person understand the decisions that they're trying to make, be organized, be proactive? As it relates to focus and professional goals, this is really about probing the thought process about gaining an MBA and how that fits into short and long-term professional goals. Not only does the applicant have these, but do they make sense in the context of the MBA environment? Do they have a sense of the career trajectory that they're looking for, as well as expressing their past career results? And can this person express some of the prior achievements that they've had that would give some indication of their ability to be successful in the future? And of course, we want their enthusiasm about coming to Chicago Booth. Now, there's a variety of ways that an individual can express that, but we do want to see knowledge of the program, whether it's courses or elements of the teaching style, what it is about this program that they're enthusiastic about. And really, in many ways, their overall preparation for the interview shows how important coming to our MBA program is for that applicant. So overall, as you take away some of the insights from this discussion, it's really about being clear on what each of these definitions means. And when we get together and we go through some of the additional training, we're going to be talking about the best way to develop questions to assess each of these characteristics. The next topic I want to spend a few minutes on is reviewing the various question types that could be used in conducting an interview. I think it's an important understanding to have because the way in which you ask a question can really help or not help the overall evaluation of a candidate. The candidate is very much led to answer based on the way that you ask the question. So what I want to do is review a variety of question types, the examples that demonstrate those, and then a little bit of the pro and con of those question types. Ultimately, what we want to do is understand which of these question types is best for an admissions interview and why that is. So there's a couple different question types. The first is open-ended, then we have experience-based. There's also a behavioral question. Another question type is scenario, a technical question, and an abstract question. So in some ways, these may not seem all that different, but I think when we compare the potential example of each of those question types, it should begin to distinguish each in your understanding. So an open-ended question is probably one that you've seen quite a lot in your own interview process. It's very broad. It doesn't also point to a particular skill set. It might be a question such as, tell me about an important goal that you've set in the past and how successful you were in accomplishing it. It doesn't have specific definition. It allows the candidate some latitude to think about their experience. One of our considerations when we ask open-ended questions is to make sure that, in fact, they are open-ended. We could take that same question and ask it in a way which really is much narrower in scope. If instead I ask the question, have you ever achieved an important goal? The candidate in some ways is asked to narrow their answer. It almost implies a yes answer with maybe a description of the goal, but it doesn't allow the candidate latitude to maybe know that they should explain the process that they went through to achieve that goal. So the precision of the question is a little bit important, and that's something to be thinking about. In contrast, we have an experience-based question. There is a slight difference from the open-ended question. The reason for that is that the experience-based question tends to tie to a particular characteristic or skill or behavior that we're looking for in a potential applicant. So in the case of the Booth characteristics, one of them that we're looking at is resilience. So if I targeted to that characteristic, I might ask a question such as, describe a major obstacle which you have had to overcome. How did you overcome that situation? So in that type of a question, I'm really pushing the applicant to speak of a specific example, use evidence, talk about their actions, but it's tied to a particular characteristic. The next question type we call behavioral. This really asks a little bit of a different type of a question. A question such as, how do you handle a challenge, ultimately prompts the applicant or the interviewee to answer is more of a description of the process or the approach or the behaviors. It doesn't necessarily drive them towards offering a specific example. Now, some candidates may proactively give a specific example, but the behavioral question, the way that it's asked, it's really a bit more about describing style or approach or process. So that's something to keep in mind. The next question is a scenario. In many ways, this is almost like a mini case. It's a question that gives an applicant a situation and it asks them to forecast or project or describe how they would handle that particular situation. So one example of that could be you're working on a class project and one of the team members isn't contributing, not even coming to the meetings. What do you do? That's a great question, and it may get at some of the characteristics, but it forces the candidate to really think about the situation and in the moment think how they would handle it. It doesn't necessarily ask them to use a particular experience from their past. There's just a difference between that type of question and one of the alternative question types that really drives the applicant to use a specific example. The next question type is a technical question. This is something that many of you may be accustomed to. The finance interviews, the investment banking interviews, marketing interviews, those type of functions often use that question type in a variety of different ways. But it really is probing the specific skills that are necessary to be evaluated for the particular role that the candidate is looking for. So it could be a question such as, can you describe a time when you used financial data to identify key business planning issues or concerns? Obviously, if you're interviewing for some type of a finance role, that would be a great question. And then the final question type is one that we call abstract. This is the type of question that there's no particular example, there's no particular one way. What you're really looking for is something that assesses the candidate's personality or the logic in their thinking or the structure in their approach or how they may handle a curveball. It could be a question like, Which item would you take to a desert island and why? So, as you can see from this, there's a lot of different ways to ask questions. They each have a different purpose, they each have a different intention, and they should be tying back again to the rubric that you're using to assess the candidate. Given the variety of question types, and when we think about what we're trying to accomplish in the admissions interview, there are a couple of question types which really do better serve our desired outcomes than others. Essentially, the open-ended and experience-based questions really help us better get at the assessment that we're looking for. There's a couple of reasons for that. Both of those question types really push a candidate towards providing a specific example. It's the best opportunity for a candidate to present their prior qualifications, the preparation also that they've done for the interview, and in many ways, it's also a better way for you as the interviewer to be more objective in evaluating the candidate and being able to compare one candidate to another. So as you're considering the questions that you're going to ask, it's important to be able to map them back to making sure that ideally they're an open-ended or an experience-based question. That covers some of the key points that we wanted to walk through as part of this introductory video in advance of our time together. As a high-level overview of the agenda, there's really two things that we're going to be doing in the afternoon session. The first is some discussion and review of a set of topics. So probing a little bit further on some of the interview discussion from this video, going deeper around the questions that are going to be appropriate to ask, some of the techniques of conducting an interview, and how you might go about assessing a candidate. The second part of our session is then taking that information and applying it, doing some small group activities, preparing, practicing, and then having some debriefs as a group so that we can get insights from one another. I think it'll be a great session, and hopefully you all will walk away ready and confident to go into the process of doing your mock interviews and ultimately conducting the actual applicant interviews. I just want to thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this introductory video. I hope you found it useful in setting some of the context for the training that we're going to be doing together. And I look forward to seeing everyone at the Admissions Fellows training.